or moved, because the microphone here is very sensitive and it will pick up the sound of the fan. So it might be a little uncomfortable, but remember, this is for the benefit of others on the outside who will get to listen. Excuse me? It's what? It's much better. Okay. Okay, so let us start in the traditional way with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's better that I stand so people in the back can see this handsome young monk. So this is the third Abhidhamma retreat that we're holding. Initially in the poster and in the mailing, I said that in this retreat I would cover the last 3 chapters of the Manual of Abhidhamma. That was before I actually sat down and started to look at the first of those 3 chapters, and I realized that it's just too much material to try to cover in one 4-day gathering. So we'll be covering chapters 7 and 8 this year, and then you get a chance to, you can't tune in next week, same time, same station, but you'll get a chance next year. We'll do chapter 9. And this year I'll be treating the format a little bit differently than I did the previous 2 years. The previous 2 retreats, I had the evening session completely devoted to questions and discussion. But now there's a lot of material to cover. And so what I'm going to do is also to have the evening session for a talk and discussion. And we have the sort of intermixed with the lectures, there'll be periods for asking questions, particularly as I finish a particular topic. Then I'll ask whether there's any questions. And there's a certain rule about asking questions. Let me see if I could remember the rule. The question should be pertinent to the topic. The question should be clearly expressed and should be as concise as possible. Okay, so let us start. Let me just ask out of curiosity, who is coming to an Abhidhamma retreat for the first time? Wow. After tonight's lecture, if anybody wants to deregister for the retreat. Okay, but what I'm doing in this evening's presentation is I'll be doing something of an overview of the material that was covered over the previous 2 sessions. But first, I want to take the title of this chapter. This is chapter 7. The title is Samuccaya Sangaha, which is translated here as the compendium of categories. And the word samuccaya comes from the verbal root chi, giving the verb chinati or chinoti, which means to collect. And then the prefix sam gives the idea of together. So this is collecting together. And what this chapter does, it's called the compendium of categories because it collects together all of the various phenomena that were mentioned in the previous chapters, and then it classifies them according to certain categories. And these categories, according to which this chapter will collect and classify all of these phenomena, these categories are based on what you might call the overarching theme of the Dharma. That is, the categories are based on the 4 Noble Truths. And so we can see through this chapter, we could see how the Abhidhamma actually is not something really remote from the core doctrine or teaching of the Buddha Dhamma, the 4 Noble Truths. You know, some people say, the Abhidhamma is just a lot of scholastic elaboration. And yes, there is scholastic elaboration in the Abhidhamma, but the concern of the Abhidhamma teaching is to elaborate upon the core teachings of the 4 Noble Truths and to give us a really detailed, almost a kind of microscopic perspective on the 4 Noble Truths, to show us how this entire range of experience and all of its diversity is comprehended within the 4 Noble Truths. And so as we go through the different categories that are treated in this chapter, taking the main headings, we could see how they are expansions upon the principles of the 4 Noble Truths. For example, the first set of categories that we're going to come across are the defilements, different ways of classifying the mental defilements. And so this is connected to the second noble truth, which is the truth of the dukkha samudaya, the origin of dukkha, of suffering. So in the suttas, when the Buddha explains the second noble truth, it's always, what is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is craving. But craving isn't the only defilement of the mind, but there are many other defilements that arise along with craving, or that are branches that branch out of craving, or that are even more fundamental than craving. And so within this section on the unwholesome, the akusala sangaha, we're going to see how the Abhidhamma takes all of these or many of these defilements that are even mentioned in the suttas and then lays them out in a very straightforward presentation of, you call it, the dark side of the mind. Okay, and then this is connected to, you call it, the project, the reason why the Abhidhamma, the manual of Abhidhamma, the reason why it groups all of these defilements together is because the Buddha teaches that the origin of suffering is to be abandoned, to be eliminated. So the task in following the Buddha's teaching, or at least from one angle, the task is to eliminate, to abandon, to overcome the defilements that are the cause of suffering. And in order to eliminate these defilements, we have to see what they are. We have to be able to understand them. And so this compendium of the unwholesome is going to show us, to lay out very clearly, the great range and diversity in the defilements of the mind. Okay, the fourth noble truth is the truth of the way to the cessation of suffering. And within the framework of the Four Noble Truths, the way is always explained as the Noble Eightfold Path. And so the Noble Eightfold Path, with the 8 factors of the path, is the kind of ideal plan, a ground plan for the practice of the Buddha Dharma. But even in the suttas, the Buddha has laid out or expounded the practice of the Dhamma in terms of other categories, other groups of factors that are to be practiced. And so in the manual, we have in the 3rd section of this chapter is called the Compendium of the Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, the requisites of enlightenment. The Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, these are 37 factors that constitute the practice, which are organized into 7 sets or 7 groups. And as we'll see, these groups are to a great extent overlapping or mutually referential, so that one group will be an expansion of a factor included in another group. But as we look at them, we can get a very panoramic view of the practice of the teaching. And we can see which factors are repeated in one group after another, so that we can see what are the really key elements in the practice of the Dhamma. Okay, so these 7 groups, or 37 aids to enlightenment, which are expansions, elaborations of the Noble Eightfold Path, these are the things, the special task regarding these factors is to cultivate or develop them. In Pali, this is bhavetabang, that is, these things are to be developed. And so what we have to do is to develop the 37 aids to enlightenment. And to develop them, again, we have to know what they are. to be able to see them very clearly and to see their interrelationships. Okay, then the Buddha teaches that the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering, or dukkha. And in fact, when we use the word suffering to render dukkha, then we tend to think that Buddhism is primarily concerned with experiences like pain, sorrow, dejection, sadness, unhappiness, anxiety, worry. And of course, the Dharma does help to deal with these problems of psychological or mental distress. But the Buddha, even in the suttas, gives a much deeper explanation of the truth of dukkha. He says that it is these 5 aggregates, the 5 factors of existence that are subject to clinging, that constitute the truth of dukkha. That is, it's the panchupadana khandha, the 5 aggregates or factors bound up with clinging. And so to practice the Dharma, the task, the special task, is to understand the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the factors that make up our own experience. And so to practice the Dhamma, our task is to understand our own experience, to understand the 5 aggregates. But the Buddha also sometimes explains the first noble truth in other ways with reference to other groups besides the 5 aggregates. For example, we have the 6 sense bases, or 6 sense faculties, which is elaborated into the 12 sense bases when we have the sense faculties and the sense objects. Then we have the 18 elements. So all of these different groups give us different perspectives on the nature of experience. And we find in the compendium of categories that the text is going to bring all of these groups, or at least the major groups, together and show their interrelationships. Okay, so we could say that this is why this chapter is called the compendium of categories, because it takes the major categories or groups of phenomena, even that we find in the suttas, and it gathers them, collects them all together, and lays them out so that we could see, get a very, very broad, comprehensive picture of the teachings of the Buddha. Okay, now I'm going to turn to the text itself, and then we'll be like reading portions and then explaining. Okay, so the introductory verse says that the 72 kinds of entities have already been described together with their characteristics. Now I will speak of their categories in the ways that are applicable. Okay, so we have this expression, 72 kinds of entities. Okay, these 72 kinds of entities are comprised in what are called the 4 kinds of ultimate realities, or paramatta Dhamma. I'm not so happy with the expression ultimate realities, but that's the word that's, or the expression that's used in the text. Paramatta Dhamma. Maybe we could call these the foundational realities. Okay, so the four kinds of ultimate or foundational realities are citta, which is mind or consciousness, the ceitasikas, which are the mental factors, the rupas are material phenomena, and nibbana. Nibbana is in Sanskrit nirvana. This is the unconditioned state. Okay, the first three kinds of realities, citta, mind, the mental factors, the material phenomena, are all conditioned, and nibbana is unconditioned. And the first task of the Abhidhamma in the initial chapters, is to give us what I call a topography or a map of citta. Citta is, we translate mind, and in its essence, mind is just one. Mind has just one function, one characteristic, which is awareness of an object, the experiencing of an object. So the essential nature of mind is to know, not necessarily in a cognitive way or a conceptual way, but to be aware or to experience. But even though mind is just one in its essence, but the Abhidhamma gives us a very detailed analysis of the mind. And to understand this analysis, we have to see how the Abhidhamma, based on the suttas, is treating the mind. Usually we think of the mind as just some kind of entity that remains constant, remains always the same. But according to the Buddha's teaching, mind, what we call mind, actually consists of a rapid succession of momentary acts of mind. And these acts of mind succeed one another so quickly that we don't see the differentiation in the states of mind. Unless we really develop our capacity for mindfulness and clear comprehension, then we can start to see the arising and falling away of different states of mind. So I compare this to the way these states of mind go by so quickly. Like this video camera, I believe it's 25 frames per second. It seems unbelievable that in 1 second, 25 frames are going by, which is why when it plays back, it seems like, that I'm just moving continuously. My image is always the same, except that there are just, differences in movement, but the image is the same. But if we, I don't know how you do this, but if you take because we don't have film anymore, with film you could see it more clearly. But if we understand how the camera is working, it's taking these individual frames, which are sort of run together when they're played back so quickly that we don't see the individual frames. And so the mind is just like that video camera, except that the video camera only takes 25, 30 frames per second, which is nothing compared to what the mind goes through. With the mind, it's like thousands of frames per second. And what the Buddha has done and the teachers of the Abhidhamma is to break down this whole landscape of the mind, sort of like taking a landscape and then building a map out of it, showing the rivers, the hills, the towns, the cities. Okay, and so the Buddha has laid this out, or at least, let's say, the Abhidhamma, masters of the Abhidhamma have laid this out by taking citta, the mind, and dividing it according to certain principles of classification. And there are two primary principles of classification. One is according to the plane of consciousness, or sphere of consciousness. The other, which I'll come to, is according to the, I think I used the word, types of consciousness. And to see how this scheme has been laid out, it's useful. I hope you all have the comprehensive manual with you. It's useful to look at the table on page, basically we get pretty much the same table on pages, one is on 28, but the one that I think lays it out more clearly, at least for a quick perception, is on page 70. And so we have 4 spheres of consciousness. Four spheres of consciousness, and these correspond, at least the first 3, correspond closely to the 3 planes of existence. The Buddhist universe is divided up according to 3 planes of existence, 3 planes in which human beings, 3 planes in which living beings dwell. So these 3 planes, we call them the sensory plane, the fine material plane, and the immaterial plane. And then beyond the 3 planes of existence, there is the unconditioned or the supramundane state, which is nirvana. Now, states of consciousness are divided by way of these four levels or 4 planes. But the spheres of consciousness and the planes of existence are not identical. A sphere of consciousness includes the types of consciousness which are typical of a particular plane of existence. I'm going to illustrate this, so don't get worried if it sounds abstract. Okay, let me repeat this. The sphere of consciousness includes states of consciousness which are typical of a particular plane of existence. And so the sense sphere types of consciousness are those types of consciousness which are typical of beings in the sensory plane of existence. The fine material sphere of consciousness consists of those types of consciousness that are typical of beings in the fine material realm of existence or plane of existence. The immaterial sphere of consciousness consists of those types of consciousness which are typical of the beings in the immaterial plane of existence. But when I say that a type of consciousness is typical of a particular plane of existence, this doesn't mean that the beings in a particular plane of existence can develop or can experience only the states of consciousness connected to that plane. For example, as human beings, most of the time, we're experiencing states of consciousness that belong to the sensory plane. But if we do samadhi meditation, that we choose a single object, we focus on that object, we unify the mind to the point that the mind enters that state of deep absorption called the jhanas. Those states of jhana consciousness are fine material sphere types of consciousness. That is, the jhana consciousness is typical of the beings in the fine material realm. But as human beings, we can experience those types of consciousness right here in the human realm. And if we develop the samadhi even more deeply, to the point that we achieve what are called the formless or immaterial states of absorption, the immaterial meditative attainments, then we are experiencing states of consciousness that belong to the immaterial sphere, the formless sphere, the states of consciousness typical of the beings dwelling in the formless sphere. And so as a human being, we have access to states of consciousness that pertain to the fine materials realm, or to the fine material sphere, states of consciousness that pertain to the immaterial sphere. And then beyond the three spheres of existence, there is the supramundane or world-transcending reality, that is nibbana. And then by developing insight or wisdom strongly and deeply enough, then we can penetrate to the realization, the experience of nibbana. Then we are undergoing supramundane or world-transcending states of consciousness. So all of these states of consciousness can be experienced by us human beings right here in the human world. Okay, so one way of dividing up states of consciousness is according to the sphere. So we have the four spheres: sensory or sense sphere, fine material sphere, immaterial sphere, and supermundane. The other way of dividing up consciousness is according to what I call the four types of consciousness. The four types rank the states of consciousness according to their ethical quality, their moral quality. And so we have, on this way of, from this perspective, we have four types of consciousness. We have unwholesome consciousness, unwholesome states of consciousness, which is consciousness that is motivated by greed, hatred, and delusion. And unwholesome consciousness is always essentially sense sphere. There's no such thing as unwholesome consciousness pertaining to the fine material sphere or the immaterial sphere. The beings in those realms, say the beings, the deities in the fine material sphere, can undergo unwholesome states of consciousness. But when they undergo those states of consciousness, they are experiencing sense sphere types of consciousness. And if they continue to dwell on those states of consciousness, on greed, delusion, ignorance, that will lead them back to the human realm or to even to lower realms. Okay, so the first is unwholesome consciousness. The second is wholesome consciousness. And wholesome consciousness pertains to all four spheres. That is, we have wholesome consciousness of the sense sphere. For example, when we do good deeds, if we practice generosity, when we act morally, when we are developing good states of mind and meditation, those would be wholesome states of consciousness pertaining to the sense sphere. But if we go further and achieve the jhanas, those are wholesome states of consciousness of the fine material sphere. And if we go further in concentration and develop the immaterial jhanas, then we are experiencing wholesome states of consciousness of the immaterial sphere. And if we develop wisdom to the point that we make that breakthrough to realization, then we will be experiencing supramundane, wholesome states of consciousness. These are called technically the four world-transcending path consciousnesses. Okay, so we've dealt with unwholesome and wholesome. The third type of consciousness is, according to type or class, is resultant consciousness. This is consciousness. Now, the wholesome and unwholesome types of consciousness create karma. So states of mind that arise from greed, hatred, delusion, greed, hatred, and delusion create unwholesome karma. States of consciousness rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion create wholesome karma. And this karma, good and bad, wholesome and unwholesome, produces its results. And the result of karma are states of consciousness. And those are called resultant states of consciousness. Technically, vipaka citta. These are states of mind that come through the maturation, the ripening of the unwholesome and wholesome karma. And we call the results of karma, we divide them into two types: unwholesome resultants and wholesome resultants. The unwholesome resultants are not unwholesome themselves. They are the results of unwholesome karma. The wholesome resultants are not wholesome themselves, but they are the results of wholesome karma. The results are morally neutral. They're neither wholesome nor unwholesome because they're just the results. We're not doing anything new when we experience the results. If, for example, I burn my hand, I touch a hot stove, that painful feeling might be the result of some unwholesome karma that I did. So I would say the painful feeling is an unwholesome resultant. It's a result of some bad karma that I did in the past. But experiencing the pain itself is not unwholesome. It's just neutral. Similarly, if I gamble in the lottery and I win the lottery, that success, maybe it's the result, coming about as the result of some wholesome karma in the past, which is now bringing its result. So I win the lottery and I get rich, but winning the lottery is not wholesome or unwholesome. It's just the result of the karma. Okay, and then there are results in each of these planes of existence. Results in the sensory plane, sense sphere resultants, fine material sphere resultants, immaterial sphere resultants, and supramundane resultants. The supramundane resultants are called the fruits of the holy or noble path. Okay, the fourth type of karma is called, we use the translation functional, which is just a term because it's hard to find another term to use. In Pali, the word is Kriya. Or Kriya. And this category is used, it's a little strange, it's used for two types of cittas. One, are certain acts of consciousness that just perform essential functions in the process of experience. We don't have to go into them right now. Like turning to an object that arises is one example. Turning to an object at the senses, turning to an object that appears to the mind. That function of turning to the mind, of the mind turning to the object, is a functional type of consciousness. Okay, the other part of the functional types of consciousness are the actions of an arahant, or the states of consciousness, the active states of consciousness of an arahant. When an arahant acts, his states of consciousness don't create any karma, because the arahant has cut off all of the bonds, all of the defilements. And so he's completely, in this life, he's liberated from future birth, old age, and death. And so his consciousness doesn't create any karma. All of his deeds, we will judge them as good or wholesome, but technically they're not considered wholesome, because wholesome is that which creates good karma, and the arhat doesn't create any karma. It's said that his deeds, his or her deeds, it's like the flight of birds through the sky. Like when the deer walks down the path, you see footprints. When a bear walks through a road, you see footprints. But when the bird flies across the sky, no tracks. Okay, so this is consciousness, the first of the four ultimates. Normally, I would ask if there's any questions, but any quick questions? We could go till 8:30, I think. Okay, the question, you have to remember my... Okay, please. The question should just be to clear up anything that's unclear in what I said.
Just how this question on the functional thing said it's turning to the object, what that really means.
Okay, just very quickly, an object, say, impinges or strikes on a sense faculty. Like something comes into my field of vision, and then the mind turns to that form that appears. Or there's a sound comes, and then suddenly my mind turns to that sound. So that is what I call the function of turning to the object. Technically, it's called the avajjana citta. Please take the microphone.
I'd like to clear up a little bit about the nature of resultant cittas and resultant karma. Is it correct to believe, or is it correct that a resultant would be like a feeling, for example?
A what?
Like a sensation or a feeling or an experience.
Mm.
Now that could then, for example, you put your hand on the stove, the burning, you have that sensation.
Yeah.
Now that sensation then could lead to an actionable.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Is that how it works?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the resultants are not confined to what you call sensations or passively experienced, they're not confined to passively experienced sensations. They have a much wider range. But that's just a particularly clear example of one type. Okay, I want to move on. Did you have a...
Oh.
You came in a little late, but...
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Quick. When you experience a result of wholesome or unwholesome karma, could you still have an aversion or a attachment to the result and generate?
Oh yes, I think that's pretty much the same point.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
The result is something that one passively undergoes, and then that result, as in reaction to that result, then one will act in one way or another, and that will create
karma.
a fresh bundle of new karma.
Gotcha. That's it.
Okay, yeah, please.
Bhante, you mentioned that the actions of a arhat does not create any karma.
Yeah.
So when we understand the cause and effect, so in this case we are saying there is no effect of the action that they do?
Oh, no, their actions will have effects. We call them visible effects. It's just that the action is not creating karma
for them.
That's going to be sort of stored up in their stream of consciousness and then bring results at some future time.
Okay, got it, yeah.
But say, an arhat gives, say, a lecture, then it's having an effect. People are listening and maybe responding to it. But it's not creating karma that's going to produce results, the kind of karmic results. Okay, I want to move on now from the first ultimate reality, which is citta, mind or consciousness, to the second, which is chaitasikas. Now citta, though it has all of these diverse kinds, it's considered one type of reality because underlying all of these diverse chittas, there is the essential nature of mind or consciousness, which is awareness or experiencing of an object. So what accounts for the diversity of consciousness? This is what is called the Chaitasikas. The Chaitasikas is what we translate as mental factors, because when mind arises, it doesn't arise alone. If mind arose alone, from the moment of birth to the moment of death, we would just be sitting perpetually in an undifferentiated, clear awareness all the time. So what differentiates the mind with all of its variations are the Chaitasikas. The Chaitasikas are mental factors. And the mental factors, it's said that they have 4 characteristics. That is, in relation to the mind. They arise together with the mind, with a particular momentary citta. They seize together with the citta. So as I said, a citta lasts just a very brief moment, just arises and then immediately ceases. But within that split second, a whole bundle of mental factors accompany it. And when the citta ceases, all of those mental factors cease along with it. So arising together, ceasing together. The third is that they all have the same object. If the citta, the mind, is seeing a form, all of the mental factors are focused on that form. If the citta is hearing a sound, all the mental factors take that sound as the object. If the citta is dwelling on a thought or an idea, all of the mental factors take that idea as their object. So that's the third characteristic. And the fourth is that they all have the same base. That is, they all arise based on the same sense organ, you could say. So if it's an eye consciousness has arisen, seeing a form, then all of the mental factors are based on the eye. If it's an ear consciousness hearing a sound, all the mental factors are based upon the ear. So that applies eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. Then the sixth base, the Abhidhamma, following the ancient Indian physiology, says that the base for, we call this, internal states of consciousness, like reflection, pondering, examining, thinking about an object. We usually think it's the brain, but according to the ancient Indian physiology, it's called the heart base, which is not the same as the physical heart, but is said to be some kind of subtle matter in the area of the heart. Maybe if today those who want to give a scientific interpretation will say, it's the brain. Okay, now the Abhidhamma classifies the mental factors, the Chaitasikas, into 52 types. So there are 52 types of mental factors, and we have these laid out 76, page 76. Actually, the table is on page 79. So the mental factors are divided into certain classes. So first, I'm not going to have to go through all of them and to explain them, but just so we get an idea of what they are. We have factors that are called ethically variable. These factors take on the moral quality of the type of consciousness along with which they arise. So if it's a wholesome consciousness, they're wholesome. If it's an unwholesome consciousness, they're unwholesome. If it's a functional consciousness, they are morally neutral. So 7 are said to be universal, present in every state of consciousness, because these are like the 7 essential functions which any state of consciousness, even the simplest, must have. There is the contact, the mental contact with the object, a feeling of the object, the perception of the object, some kind of volition in regard to the object, then what is called one-pointedness, which doesn't mean that the mind is in a samadhi state, deep absorption in every object, but it just means that the mind is focused on the particular object of awareness, and what focuses that mind on that object is one-pointedness. Then there is the life faculty, which is considered to be to vitalize the mind. And then there is attention to the object. So those 7 are ethically variable and they're universals. They are always present in every state of consciousness. Then there are 6 occasionals. We translate this as occasionals. These might be present, might not be present, depending upon the state of consciousness. I dealt with this in detail in the first Abhidhamma retreat. To get the detailed explanation, the lectures are on YouTube. But just to run through them quickly here, there is what is called initial application. That is I would call this the application of the mind to the object. Then sustained application, that is the fixing of the mind on the object. A decision, some kind of decision regarding the object. Then there's energy, zest, this is what I would translate joy, piti. I don't like the rendering zest, but it comes from another translator. And then there is desire. And this is neutral desire. This is not the same as craving, but this is desire to do something. Desire to achieve something in relation to the object. So that desire can be bad, it can be good, depending on the state of consciousness. Okay, then we come to the unwholesome mental factors. And so the Theravada Abhidhamma system enumerates 14 unwholesome factors. 4 are called universals. These factors are present in all unwholesome states of consciousness. 1 is delusion, which is the same as ignorance. The 4th is restlessness. That is, in every state of consciousness, unwholesome state of consciousness, there's some degree of unsteadiness, even a subtle degree of agitation. Then the other 2, are called shamelessness, or what I call a lack of conscience regarding the unwholesome mental state. And fearlessness of wrong, that is, I call this lack of moral dread regarding the unwholesome state. So those four are called the universals. The next are the unwholesome occasionals. These are present in some unwholesome states, but they're not present in every unwholesome state. And so we can take first greed and hatred. These are two primary unwholesome mental factors, but these two, it's said, are never present simultaneously. If there's greed, there's no hatred or ill will. If there's hatred or ill will, at that moment, there's no greed. Of course, greed and hatred fuel each other, support each other, but at one moment, they can't be both present. It's like taking two magnets and putting them so that the two north poles and two south poles of the magnet are facing. The magnet, they won't attract, but it pulls away. Okay, then we have wrong view and conceit. We're going to come to deal with these in greater detail tomorrow. And wrong view and conceit are associated with greed, because it's through some kind of craving that one adopts a wrong view, and it's through craving again that one develops conceit. Okay, then associated with hatred are the next two, envy and miser. Here it's translated avarice, but I prefer miserliness. So envy arises when one dislikes the good qualities or the good fortune of others. And miserliness means one doesn't want to share one's fortune with others. So that you see they're both connected with hatred. Then comes worry or remorse. This is regret over wrong that one has done. Then sloth and torpor, or now I prefer to render them as dullness and drowsiness. And then the last of this group is doubt. And this is skeptical doubt. It's not what I would call the doubt of intelligent inquiry, which is what Buddhism encourages. We're going to come to this tomorrow, so we'll get to see what it entails in greater detail tomorrow. Okay, so these are the factors which enter into the unwholesome states of consciousness. These are the factors that make a citta, a state of consciousness, unwholesome. Okay, the next set is called the beautiful factors. Notice they're not called the wholesome factors. The reason they're not called the wholesome factors is because, this gets a little complicated, but these factors can be present in wholesome states of consciousness. They can be present in certain resultant states of consciousness, and they are also present in the functional consciousness of an arhat. So an arhat has these beautiful mental factors, but his consciousness is not called wholesome, but it's called functional. So the beautiful factors can be either wholesome, resultant, or functional. Okay, then with the beautiful factors, we have 19 that are universal, that are present in every beautiful state of consciousness. And these, you could see, maybe the two most basic will be non-greed, non-hatred, the absence of those two bad roots. Then we have qualities like faith or trust. This isn't blind faith, but trusting confidence. Mindfulness, some degree of mindfulness is present in every beautiful consciousness. The sense of shame, I don't really like that rendering, but I can't think of a better one. Because when we feel ashamed of something, it's usually a shriveled up state of mind. But this, maybe we could think of it as the sense of, what I call this, the sense of inner dignity or self-respect that prevents one from doing anything unwholesome. And that goes along with fear of wrongdoing. Then neutrality of mind, this is mental balance. And then we have a set of other, I think there are 6, tranquility of mind, lightness, malleability, or softness of mind, wieldiness, proficiency, rectitude. Again, for details, I treated in detail 2 years ago. So these are the universal, beautiful qualities. Then we have 3 factors which are separated out, and we'll see why again, I think tomorrow, for a special role, because they're factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then we have the 2 immeasurables, which are compassion and mudita, altruistic joy, appreciative joy. And so somebody who knows the 4 immeasurables wonders, what happened to the other 2? Where is loving kindness? Where is equanimity? It's said that loving kindness is actually a mode of non-hatred, though it's expressed negatively, non-hatred. But if we sort of refine non-hatred, it becomes a loving kindness. And whereas equanimity, basically equanimity is the same thing as neutrality of mind. And so, even though loving kindness is not always present in every beautiful state of consciousness, but in every beautiful state of consciousness, there's no hatred. And so, that non-hatred is the factor, the mental factor, that when developed turns into loving kindness. But compassion and appreciative or altruistic joy are present only on those occasions. Compassion when one turns the mind to those afflicted with suffering, and then one experiences compassion for them. And altruistic joy when one turns the mind to those who have met with some good fortune or who have good qualities, and one rejoices in their good qualities. Then the last one is called non-delusion, which is, again, it's a negative expression, but when developed in a positive way, it becomes wisdom, the faculty of wisdom. Okay, so these are the beautiful mental factors, and that's the kind of quick tour through the mental factors. Any quick questions? Again, questions only for something that needs clarification. Okay, please, get the microphone here.
Thanks. You said that the Chaitasikas account for the diversity of mind. Are they what accounts for the diversity of like the subjective experiences that we have of our minds?
Excuse me?
Do they account for the diversity of the subjective experiences we have of our minds?
I'm not sure. I would guess so.
Pani, I have a very quick question. The mental factors, there are 52 numbers. And on the mind, Sita, we have 89 numbers in terms of types. Yeah. When I try to compare this, the table that is shown on page 79, under the same category with the table which shows the types of Sita on page 28, which is our very common. I mean, appears in my mind that some of the factors, even though under the same category, say like beautiful factors.
Like what?
Beautiful factors.
Yeah.
Under this mundane citas, there are only 24. And whereas in the Cetasika, it is about 25. So is there any difference?
No, don't try to compare Chaitasikas and Chitas.
But they appear together, right?
They occur together.
Occur together.
Yeah.
And they cease together also.
And cease together.
And they are also from the same base.
The same base, yeah.
So that's why I was a bit confused.
But the classifications are different.
Oh.
Okay, Kim has a question. Take the microphone.
Thank you. Bhante, what does ethically variable factors really
Ethically
mean?
variable means that these factors are not exclusively wholesome, not exclusively unwholesome, but they take on the ethical quality of the citta with which they're associated. So if I have a mind of anger, then my perception, my volition, my feeling, all become unwholesome because they're associated with the anger. If I have a mind of loving kindness, then my feeling, my perception, my volition, all become wholesome. Okay, I want to move on now because we have to take care of the material side of existence. Okay, so now we've covered citta, which in the Abhidhamma is one ultimate reality, even though it's of 89 types. 52 mental factors, so we have 53. Now there are 28 types of material phenomena, but we don't have to go through all of them. The main ones that we're going to be concerned with are what are called I think it was my own rendering of this expression, concretely produced material phenomena. This is, where are they? Page 235. But the table is page 236 in my edition. That edition may have a different page, I'm not sure. But it should be around 235. What page do you have it on? Excuse me? It's same, 235. Okay, so these are like the main types of material phenomena, the ones that are called concretely produced. So we have the four primary elements, which are here called the great essentials. So here, the Buddhist texts use the old names named after the obvious material elements, earth, water, fire, and air. But as I explained last year, these names actually signify what I would call behavioral properties of matter. So the earth element represents the property of solidity, the water element, the property of fluidity, the fire element, the property of heat or energy, and the air element, the property of motion or vibration. So these are the primary elements, sort of the foundation of the material world. Then, since the Buddha is not concerned so much with the physical world in itself, but with the world of experience, what he focuses upon are the aspects of material phenomena that are involved with experience. So we have what are called the 5 sensitive material phenomena. These are the material phenomena of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and bodily sensitivity. That is the sensitive matter of the body through which we can feel tactile or touch sensations. And what's meant by the sensitivity is that it's said that within each of these sense organs, the gross sense organ, there's a particular type of material substance that is sensitive to a particular type of object. So within the eye, there's the eye sensitivity is that substance which is sensitive to light and color. Maybe it corresponds to rods and cones of modern ophthalmology. The ear sensitivity is, the ear isn't this, but inside here, there's some kind of material substance that can pick up sounds. And so the nose is not this, but up here there is something which can pick up fragrances. And then the tongue sensitivity is diffused over the tongue, and it's sensitive to tastes. So we know this is sweet, sour, bitter. Then the body sensitivity is spread out over the whole body. Okay, then there is, corresponding to this, what are called the objective types of matter. Visible form, sound, smell or odor, taste. Only 4 are given here, because it's said that the tangible object, the tactile object, what we experience through touch, is the primary elements themselves. More specifically, according to the Theravada Abhidhamma, what we experience through touch are 3 elements. Earth, when we feel something is hard or soft. Fire, when we experience something as hot or cold. Air, when we experience something as moving, expanding, or contracting. It's said that we don't actually experience the water element through touch. This, I have to confess, is something where I disagree with the old teachers of the Abhidhamma. My story is that one day when I was back in Kandy, because it was hot outside, so we hang our towel up on a line outside. And one day I went out to find out, did my towel, after taking a bath, is it dry yet? And I felt it. It's still wet. Then I realized, according to the Abhidhamma, I shouldn't be able to experience wetness. Anyway, that's the way it is. Sometimes we have to disagree with our own tradition. Okay, then there's something called sexual phenomena or sexual. Don't get excited. No censors have to come in here. This is, we might call this the material phenomena of sexual determination. That which determines feminine qualities or properties, which makes a female, that which determines male properties, or which makes a person a male. And then there's the heart base, I mentioned that before. That is the subtle kind of matter which is supposed to be in the region of the heart, which is the base for the types of consciousness, like what I would call internal reflective consciousness. Then there's the material life faculty, and then there's nutriment. And according to the Abhidhamma, nutriment is suffused throughout our whole body. You know, it's not only the outer food we eat, but nutriment is throughout the whole body. If anybody wants to raise any objections, I will invite you to step into the lion's den at the New York Bronx Zoo and see whether you would come out disagreeing with me. So these are the 18 types of material phenomena. So we don't have to go through the non-concrete phenomena, but we take all of the material phenomena together, there are 28. So we have 53 and 28. So we have one chitta is 1, 52 mental factors, that's 53. 28 types of matter, that's 71. But it said at the beginning that there are 72 entities, so one is missing. What are we missing out on? What's missing? Did I skip something? With age, my memory is getting a little weak. My ear sensitivity is not. Speak loud. Doesn't. Okay, she's bringing you the microphone.
No, maybe I was asleep when you said it, but what about the mind?
Mind is the first one.
Oh, yeah.
I already said mind is, maybe I used the Pali word chitta, mind or consciousness. So what is missing? Right, nibbana. Okay, so bring in nibbana, then we have 72. And that is the review. Maybe we'll take some questions, maybe 10 minutes of questions, then we'll do. Let me look at the schedule when we're supposed to end. Yeah, we have the metta meditation and sharing of merits, but we could take 10 minutes of questions. Okay, Lei in the back.
Lei, yeah. About Apodhatu, the water element.
This is a Burmese-trained Abhidhamma student. I'm a little... Okay, please.
Well, no, it's interesting, what you're talking about, how the commentaries say that you can't directly experience it, but you disagree. I just remember my teacher teaching me that Apodhatu actually has the function of cohesiveness.
Yeah.
So you can't directly experience the cohesiveness, but when you touch water, it's coolness plus softness, so it's actually earth plus fire. I totally, I'm just wondering, how you jive that with it seems obvious, self-evident that you can actually experience, waterness. Yeah. So,
I've considered that.
Yeah.
Now the sun in Sri Lanka, especially during the hot season, is very warm. So my towel hanging out on the line is quite warm. When I touch it, I feel the moisture is quite warm. In the shade, there's a stone which is solid, and it's quite cool. So it seems to me that the experience of wetness is distinct from the experience of coolness and softness.
So calling it cohesiveness is probably just like someone in the past being hyper-pedantic.
Yeah. And also, again, this is a technical point, but the other elements are also said to have what we call abstract functions.
Right.
Like the earth element is supposed to be foundation. The heat element has the property of maturing. The wind element has the property of oscillation, something like that. So those are abstract properties. So if you're going to say cohesion for the water element, then all four of them should be intangible.
Thank you.
Okay, but that's just a sort of trivial point. Yes, please. And take the microphone.
Bhante, when you explained us the 52 mental factors.
Wait, where is the question coming from?
Here.
Oh, okay.
There are some of them are universals and some of them are occasionals. Could you please help us understand? What's the difference between universal and occasionals?
Universal means that these mental factors are said to be present in every state of consciousness, that they're absolutely essential functions of a state of consciousness. But the occasionals are present in some states of consciousness, not present in others. As I said, the details I explained 2013. And let's see. Okay, we'll get you next. First, this gentleman, and then Thai, right?
Bhante, you explained chitta is a mind, it's awareness of an object. What is the state of a chitta at rebirth?
Phrase the question again.
What is the state of chitta at rebirth?
Okay, at rebirth there is a chitta, which is called the rebirth linking consciousness. Again, for details on the rebirth linking consciousness, well, let's say there are particular classes of consciousness, particular types which have the function of serving as the rebirth linking consciousness. That consciousness is called relinking because it links the past existence with the new existence. And there are particular types of chittas which perform that function. Again, I gave detailed explanation last year, but to find a more detailed explanation, you look in chapter 5 of the comprehensive manual. Okay, Thai here.
Bhante, I would like to just make clear, sorry for
You have to put the microphone to the mouth, not too close, and then speak fairly loudly and project your voice.
I would like to know if you say herb base is reflective consciousness.
I'm not catching.
The herb base is that is reflective consciousness?
No, the heart base itself is not a type of consciousness. The heart base is a material phenomena.
Okay.
But, let me put it this way. There is eye consciousness, which sees forms, is based on the eye. Ear consciousness is based on the ear. Nose consciousness based on nose sensitivity. Tasting consciousness based on the tongue sensitivity. Touching consciousness based on body sensitivity. But there are other types of consciousness where I'm thinking, reflecting, all other types of mental activity apart from sensory consciousness. All those other types of consciousness are said to occur based on the heart base. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Bhante, in the syllabus, it mentioned about the 18 types of material phenomena plus 4 causes.
Yeah. I didn't get into that because I saw that I was already running over time. When it becomes relevant, then I'm going to bring it in later.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Matt.
Bhante.
Okay, you have the mic already.
In the mental factors, the abstinences, like right livelihood or right action, seem to be a combination of other factors rather than a factor by itself.
Okay, so the question is that these, what are called the abstinences, seem to be combinations of other factors rather than something distinct in itself. I'm laughing because, again, this is sometimes the thinking of the formulators of the Abhidhamma. It's a little peculiar even for me to understand. The corresponding wrong factors, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, are not distinct mental factors. They say that that is simply speech which has some bad motivation. Wrong action is some bodily action with wrong motivation. But I think the idea here is that when one is observing right speech, one is exercising a particular act of abstaining from false speech, from slanderous speech, from gossip, from harsh speech. With right action, one is making one is deliberately abstaining from taking life, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, so that mental action of abstaining they consider to be a distinct mental factor. Sometimes it seems a little bit like I don't know, like thinking that okay, a square has 4 sides, top, bottom, left, right. But then there's the square itself, so there must be 5 sides to the square. Sometimes it seems to me that the thinking is going in that way. Okay, we'll just take one more question if there is one. Otherwise, we'll do the meditation. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, so that will be it for the evening. So we go and to the other side of the room. No, I don't want any more.